If you're struggling to improve in your weighted calisthenics strength, or perhaps you just started this journey, then look no further, because in this video, I'm going to be reviewing exactly what one needs to know in order to progress fast in street lifting, aka the sport for competing in weighted calisthenics. So let me stop yapping and let's get right into this.
The first and most important thing is to treat street lifting as a priority, because if you want to get strong or good at something, going all in is what you should do. The problem with most people is that they treat street lifting movements as a secondary movement, or they do it whenever they want. And this will not allow you to get to your max potential in street lifting or in these 4 movements.
If your goal is to improve in weighted calisthenics, then I urge you to listen to this point. You need to be able to prioritize your weighted calisthenics movements. Now, I personally don't train street lifting, but the way that I focus and center my training regime is very similar to the fundamentals of that to street lifting athletes, which is exactly why I'm analyzing this video, just because there's gonna be a lot of overlapping similarities when it comes to somebody who's either trying to compete for street lifting or just the average enjoyer of weighted calisthenics. So with that being said, what does making weighted calisthenics street lifting your priority actually look like in a practical sense? Well, for me, if I want to get strong in movements such as the weighted dips, weighted chin-ups, and barbell squats, that meant that I had to revolve my workouts around these big 3 primary lifts, very similar to that of how a powerlifter would approach their own programming for squats, bench, and deadlifts. But more importantly, you want to stick to these movements for each training block. You don't want to switch around any of these primary lifts around. Otherwise, you'll be deviating away from specifically training to meet your priorities. And when it comes to strength, specificity is key. Now let's take a deeper look into how one should specify their training in order to improve their weighted calisthenics movements.
Let's start with dip form. The dips have a shoulder protraction and depression. This is to protect the chest and the shoulder from overstretching. And with added weights, it can be dangerous if you're not prepared. And since the goal is to carry the most weight, this form is the best to do so. Your elbows don't go out like most gym bros do. Legs are straight. You cannot cross them, so you can press the weights and have a better balance and have a more effective movement.
Okay, in this segment, the first step to training for street lifting is to have the agenda in order to move as much weight as possible in the most efficient manner as possible, safely as possible. This means that whenever you're doing the weighted dips, for example, you need to be able to utilize the street lifting dip technique, which hits all those, prerequisites that I just mentioned earlier. And the original creator actually provided beautiful examples to take note of, such as depressing your scapular blades and engaging the shoulder protraction, which will give a very different dip execution if one refers back to the side-by-side comparison between the standard dip technique and the street lifting dip technique. Both are different, but both are correct. However, there's a time and place to one would opt for the street lifting dip technique if their objective is to move as much weight as possible in an efficient manner for the body to execute. Something that I actually noticed when making this transition. Beforehand, when I was doing the standard dip technique and I was doing like 3 plates and a little bit above, I started to feel a lot of discomfort within my sternum, my shoulders. It just didn't really feel like I was going with the natural flow of how my body would move in a dip. But once I made that transition and started doing the street lifting dip technique, all that pretty much just diminished. It felt more natural. I wasn't going against the grain of the biomechanics of the actual dip exercise. So you won't necessarily feel this issue, for most people at least, if you're doing a standard dip technique with lighter loads or just body weight, because you just haven't been challenged that much, right? Once you get to a point of doing like a certain number of plates add on to your body weight, meaning you're challenging yourself to a higher degree than normal, you're gonna notice that you're gonna need to opt for the street lifting dip technique, because it's just gonna be more suitable for the body, for the shoulder, for your elbows, and just overall health, really. So, someone now who's doing like 4 plates and above, 200 pounds on weighted dips, the street lifting dip technique is more suitable because I'm managing with heavier loads. But if I wanted to revert back to just doing body weight dips, then that's fine for me to just do the standard dip technique. So that's what I mean by there's a time and place to when you should utilize the standard dip technique and when you should incorporate the street lifting technique. So hope that clarifies a lot of the misconceptions between like which one's correct. They're both correct. There's just a time and place to when to utilize them. But with that being said, if I had to just summarize real quick, exactly how I approach the street lifting dip technique, this will be it. First, hold the dip bars tight with your palms. Second, as you hold your body weight into the dip position, start to protract your shoulders. Thirdly, maintain tucked elbows. Then begin to depress your shoulder blades downwards for stability in your upper body, and simultaneously begin to extend your legs all the way straight by flexing your quads, squeezing your glutes, and keeping your feet against the plates. And lastly, maintaining neutral head position. So I want to make sure that I kind of reiterate the fact that you want to lock in on these points that I just mentioned, specifically shoulder depression, whenever you begin to hold yourself in that dip position, because this is really going to be establishing stability. And whenever you're doing weighted dips with a lot of plates hang on your body weight, stability is key. Otherwise, it's going to ruin your set. So by engaging shoulder depression or scapular depression, and keeping your core tight, having your body position straight, meaning you're flexing your quads, you're keeping your lower body stacked with your hips, your shoulders, etc., this is going to be putting you in a perfect position to actually begin the weighted dip. Then once you begin to lower yourself, allow your head to shift downwards. This will prevent any neck discomfort, and lower all the way into your shoulders is at least parallel to your elbows. Now here's an important part when pushing back up. You want to continue to maintain tucked elbows, maintain straight legs, and please do not lose that tension in your shoulder depression and core engagement, because this is really what's going to help stabilize your body when pressing back up. If you do all the steps that I just mentioned before, then you should be in a good position to, carry on forward with the street lifting dip.
Lastly, pull-ups form. In the pull-ups, the arms have to be fully extended, the legs straight, and pressing the weights. A slight retraction of the body to make the movement more effective, and chin over the bar always. Controlling the weight with your leg is key if you want to carry the most weight possible.
Now, I currently don't train the weighted pull-ups anymore as of the last 2 years, and I focus more so on the weighted chin-ups. But if we just stick to what he just said regarding the pull-ups, everything is pretty much accurate. And I don't want to reiterate what he said, but I kind of do want to just touch on this particular point a little more deeper. You want to make sure that you keep your feet besides the plate to prevent the loads from swinging. This also goes for the dips as well. Otherwise, you'll notice a lot of your reps will become even more difficult and challenging as the set progresses, because now you're trying to reestablish stability with your body weight and the additional external weight that's attached to your body. And we're not going to be in that straight and static line that we want. Secondly, I do want to mention that I noticed an example that he's showing for the pull-up form that the person was doing like a semi-false grip hand position. And this is something that I actually noticed that I do myself as well, particularly when I want to get in more repetitions and be more explosive, or even when I'm doing weighted pull-ups, because, ultimately, the better you are weighted pull-ups, the more explosive you are by default. So I don't know if this is like a natural tendency that correlates to, being stronger, or you feel like you have more control over the amount of explosiveness you have. If you have your thumb over the bar instead of under the bar, which is going to be known as the semi-false grip, as most people like to call it, this is going to help with establishing just more repetitions and, establishing more explosiveness to your actual reps. So that's something that I've noticed. I'm not sure if it's a common theme that all street lifters use, but based off the example that he's shown, this guy's clearly doing it. So I'm going to just assume so, but hey, I'm not going to be generalizing for everybody, right?
You should start your program with a higher rep range to build some muscle mass and work capacity, and some accessories to help you with the weak links. And then move to pure street lifting with a high frequency, like 3 times a week and around 10 total sets a week. And of course, you have to know how to manage the load in every session, because you cannot work with 80% plus of the load 3 times a week, because it is unsustainable and unrealistic.
Okay, here's the part that you may have all been waiting for, and this is the strength programming aspect of weighted calisthenics or street lifting. So it's really important that one understands how to approach the sequencing of exercise structure within the individual session, because I noticed that this is a mistake that a lot of beginners make when they want to kind of get into a new program or implement a new progressive overload method, and they just kind of have their sequencing all mixed and matched up. Like they're doing like their isolations first, then compounds, like heavy primary compounds last, or they're doing like multiple heavy compound movements back to back. And it's just like, not the best of sequencing. That being said, he then talks about training frequencies and intensities. And frequency just means how many times you train a movement per week. Intensities can be measured as the amount of effort that you put on exercise, such as RPE, rate of perceived exertion, or RIR, the amount of reps in reserve that you have on the exercise. And then of course, he mentions how you shouldn't be training the same intensities multiple times per week. And I do agree to a certain limit where this is only true if you don't vary your rep ranges. Meaning if you're training the dips 3 times per week using 3 sets of 5 reps each and every day of that week, then yes, you shouldn't be training within the same intensities. You should vary the intensities because you're not varying the rep ranges. This could be like a heavy day, moderate day, and then a light day for 3 sets of 5 reps on each given day. Now that in a nutshell is called managing your intensities. Now there's another approach that you can do as well, which is something I personally do and I recommend as well. And this is to focus on training within the same intensities, the amount of effort that you put on that week, such as 70% for that week, but you're varying the rep ranges. Meaning in this example, you can have a similar approach. You can train the weighted dips also 3 times per week within the same intensities, but you're varying the amount of reps that you're doing on each session. So each session will have like a specific dedicated rep range. And by default, if you're doing, 70%, or let's say 100% effort, right, for a 3 rep max day, then 100% effort on a 10 rep max day, and then another 100% effort on a 15 rep max day, by default, you're not gonna be utilizing the same loads, right? And that's what I want to kind of get to. Intensities doesn't necessarily mean loads. It just means how much effort that you're putting in. And the issue with training with high intensities constantly is that most people attribute intensities as loads. And if you're doing the same loads multiple times per week, meaning you're training within the same intensities multiple times per week for that same given exercise for the same rep range, you're gonna eventually gas yourself out. And you're going to actually not only hit a plateau, you're going to injure yourself, right? So by varying the rep ranges, I'm by default adjusting how much loads I'm training. Now, because I kind of manage my intensities by varying my rep ranges, I'm by default allowing my body to not, beat myself up. So this is the approach that I take. I train weighted dips twice a week. I have a strength-based day, a volume-based day. One where I'm training lower rep ranges and, I'm doing 3 rep maxes. So let's say my current 3 rep max is 217.5 pounds. By default, I cannot do any more than 3 reps if that's my 100% effort, right? Now at my volume day, if my current A rep max is 170 pounds, I by default can't do any more repetitions with 170 pounds because that's my max effort. So just want to clarify that there's different approaches, different methods to training weighted calisthenics to training street lifting. But I kind of want to just point out the 2 differences in terms of like ways you can approach weighted calisthenics to implement progressive overload and how to manage your intensities and so on. I hope all of that made sense, because if it did, then you definitely will be on a good route to improving in your weighted calisthenics journey. But hey, what do I know? If you want to see more content like this, be sure to follow me, man. I'm the Tough Fitness Scout here. No cap.
Cobra Trains, he's up next. Make sure y'all subscribe to him. He's number 1 out here.
He's the toughest fitness guy out here.